Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Elisabeth Forster. I'm lecturer in modern Chinese history here at the University of Southampton. And in today's lecture I want to talk to you about China and the atomic bomb in the Cold War era. And in about half an hour you will know what I mean when I give this lecture the title Atomic Bombs and Paper Tigers. In 1964, China successfully tests its first atomic bomb. And in China, this is presented as a great moment in modern Chinese history. Now, in a couple of seconds, I want to show you a Chinese propaganda video, and I want you to pay attention to the following things. Pay attention to the visuals, pay attention to what you see, pay attention to the music, and pay attention to what the narrator is saying. Now, one point I have to make, this video, that the title of this video on YouTube claims that this is about the first explosion in 1964. This is not true. It's in fact about a later explosion, but this doesn't matter at all for the point I want to get across. So enjoy the video and I'll see you in 2 slides.
Our nation successfully explodes its second nuclear bomb in the sky over the western part of our country. This is an extremely accurate and extremely successful explosion. This demonstrates the great results of cooperation among leaders, specialists, and the masses, and of the cooperation of education with research. This is another victory song for Mao Zedong's thought.
Okay, so I'll give you my close reading of this video. I feel this video depicts a story of success and of victory. And I'm saying this because in the background you got this incredibly upbeat music. Then you do see the explosion and the destruction it causes, but you also see a lot of cheering people. So people are very enthusiastic about this. And I think then the speaker really drives home the point I'm trying to make, namely that this is a story of success. So the speaker, among other things, says the following: "Our nation successfully explodes its second nuclear bomb in the sky over the western part of our country. This is an extremely accurate, extremely successful explosion, which demonstrates the great results of cooperation among leaders, specialists, and the masses, and of the collaboration of education with research. This is another victory song for Mao Zedong's thought." So the point I'm trying to make here is that for China in the 1960s, having an atomic bomb is about more than just having a weapon. It's really about international prestige. And here I want to quote my colleague Nicola Horsberg, who says, for China this is being part of an international, I quote her, nuclear club. And in this lecture, I want to tell you the story for why gaining a status as a global player is quite so important for China, how China dealt with not having an atomic bomb for 15 years, while its main enemy, namely the United States, did have one, and then how China built its own atomic bomb by 1964. Now, in my lectures, I very often give students takeaway points. These are key points that I hope people will be able to explain at the end of the lecture. So please pause the recording for a second, have a look at your takeaway points, and I'll see you on the next slide. Now, for this story to make sense, I have to take you all the way back to the 19th century. In the 19th century, we have in China something called the Qing Dynasty. The Qing Dynasty ran from 1644 to 1911, and you see here a map of the Qing Dynasty on the slide. So you see the Qing Dynasty was huge in terms of territory. And under the Qing, China really was the dominating power in East Asia. And this idea of China as the dominating power in East Asia was backed up by a certain ideology. And this ideology projected the idea that China was the civilizational center not just of East Asia, but of the whole world. And the idea here is that within this ideology, that people coming from other parts of the world are seen as barbarian, and the further away you get, the more barbarian it gets. So I'm sitting in Britain right now, so you can imagine Britain being very far away from China, just how barbarian it is over here. Now, this self-image of China as the center of the world collapses when China encounters Western imperialism in the 19th century. And this starts with something called the First Opium War. This is a war that China loses against Britain in the early 19th century. And after the First Opium War, China loses wars against other Western countries as well. Now, as I said, Britain, where I am right now, is very far away from China. So you can imagine how barbarian it is over here within this ideology that is endorsed in the Qing Dynasty. So losing a war against Britain is a huge shock for China, not just militarily, but also in terms of its self-image as the civilizational center of the world. And it is from that point onwards that a quest begins in China to what is then perceived as restoring China's rightful place as a global player on the international stage, and arguably this is something that drives Chinese foreign politics until the present. Now, the Qing dynasty falls in 1911. There's a revolution, the Qing falls. A few decades later, in the 1930s, China is invaded by Japan. This is part of the Second World War in East Asia. And then in 1945, when the Second World War ends, China is among the victorious powers of the Second World War. Now, one major contributing factor to the outcome of the Second World War in East Asia are nuclear weapons. The story here is this. So various powers, among them Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States, had been working on nuclear weapons for a while, and they had done so in secret. And in fact, the Soviet Union gave up on nuclear weapons research in the early 1940s, and this is one of my favorite stories in history, because it was felt that nuclear weapons research is not application-oriented enough. So the idea here was this is never going to work, so we're not going to fund this. The funding is cut, the research is put on ice. Meanwhile, the United States continue working on nuclear weapons in what is called the Manhattan Project. Now, the Second World War in Europe ends in May 1945, but is still ongoing in East Asia until something happens that I'll show you in the next slide, namely the United States drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, and then shortly afterwards on Nagasaki. Now, the video I'm about to show you has no sound, so don't be confused by that. So this was the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Shortly afterwards, another nuclear weapon is dropped on the Japanese city of Nagasaki. Japan surrenders immediately, and the Second World War in East Asia is over on the 2nd September of 1945. But nuclear weapons are now in the world, and the international community is shocked. And they try to figure out how to deal with this now. Now, wars had been destructive before, of course, But nuclear weapons introduce a whole new level of destructiveness. This is really unprecedented. And over the course of the next decades, the international community tries to come up with a range of framework to tame this whole new destructive power that mankind has put into the world. And a range of strategies are created. One is the idea to control weapons through international organization, for example, those attached to the United Nations. Another idea is the notion of mutually assured destruction, MAD, mutually assured destruction. So the idea here is that you've got the two superpowers of the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States, and they both have so many nuclear weapons that they could completely annihilate each other. So if one starts using nuclear weapons on the other one is going to retaliate, and in the end they're going to have annihilated each other completely. And therefore nobody's going to start this process just to protect themselves. So this is mutually assured destruction. So long story short, this creation of nuclear weapons really changes international views on war and peace. Now keep this in mind. We were going to go back to China for a second, and we even go back to 1945. So China was among the victorious powers of the Second World War. And this has, of course, increased its international status. But China didn't find peace for a while. There was a civil war right after the Second World War. The civil war in China was between the Chinese Communist Party and the Nationalist Party. The Chinese Communist Party won that civil war. And in October 1949, Mao Zedong proclaims the People's Republic of China, and Mao Zedong becomes the leader of the People's Republic of China. Now, for my modules, you do not need to speak any Chinese, you do not need to read any Chinese, it does not matter how you pronounce the names. Nevertheless, every once in a while I do a bit of a pronunciation exercise of important key terms and of names. So please, everybody, speak after me. Mao Zedong. Nice. Right. So Mao Zedong has proclaimed the foundation of the People's Republic of China in 1949. And this means that China is now socialist. Now, on a global level, simultaneously, the Cold War is emerging. And the Soviet Union is the leader of the Eastern Bloc. The Eastern Bloc is the socialist bloc. The United States is the leader of the Western Bloc, the capitalist bloc. And China, being socialist, is, of course, part of the Eastern Bloc under the Soviet Union. And we now enter in the early 1950s something that is called the phase of Sino-Soviet friendship. So China and the Soviet Union are allies. Now, the advantage of the Sino-Soviet friendship is that the Soviet Union, for example, sends advisors to China. And these advisors help with a range of things, for example, in terms of building the country's industry, but they also help China with building the know-how on how to get an atomic bomb. Within this new Cold War setting of the Eastern Bloc versus the Western Bloc, the United States are now all of a sudden China's enemy. Now, the problem with that is, of course, that the United States is the only country to have ever deployed an A-bomb. And therefore, the nuclear weapons owned by the United States are perceived as a major danger by China. Now, just to make things worse, the United States bombs are for a long time much better than those of the Soviet Union. If you remember, in the early 1940s, the Soviet Union had cut funding to its own nuclear weapons program. But in 1949, they do get their own atomic bomb, but for a long time this is inferior to the weapons owned by the United States. How does the population in China learn about the atomic bomb in the first place? Well, actually, in the immediate aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there was not terribly much information available about atomic weapons in China. So people knew that these weapons were very destructive. There initially didn't seem to be much knowledge about radiation poisoning, but this became known increasingly more. And over the course of the late 1940s, newspapers reported a lot about nuclear weapons. Intellectuals discussed it in journals, and they had similar debates going on as the international community was leading at the same time. Namely, are these weapons really that dangerous? How can we control them? Is this maybe also an opportunity for peaceful application, namely generation of unlimited energy, great technological progress? So there was a lot of debate going on. In the countryside, my colleague Henrietta Harrison argues that people were actually quite confused about these nuclear weapons, especially about how they were built. And a whole lot of rumors were circulating that they might even be built from people's body parts. Now, real knowledge about nuclear weapons only really came into China among the general population with a campaign against nuclear weapons of 1950. And this was called a campaign to collect signatures on the Stockholm Appeal. This Stockholm Appeal was a document created at a Congress of the World Peace Council in Stockholm, Swedish capital, in 1950. And this was created by the World Peace Council. Now, the World Peace Council was an international organization within the Socialist Eastern Bloc with a goal to create world peace under the leadership of the Soviet Union. Now, in 1950, this World Peace Council held a congress in Stockholm, and they formulated an appeal that called for the banning of atomic weapons. And so you had this central congress in Stockholm by the World Peace Council, and then the various national committees went home and sought to collect signatures on this appeal. And this is what you see here in the pictures. And China did that as well. Now, these Chinese propaganda committees that went on to collect the signatures, they also collected what they called reactions from the masses. So they asked the people, what do you think about this? And then the people gave some comments, and then this was very often reprinted in newspapers. And in one newspaper, the People's Daily, an old villager was quoted as saying the following: "Sign quickly. One name is one gun against United States imperialism." Now, the goal behind this signature appeal is a bit strange, because no matter how many signatures you collect on this appeal, this is not going to stop any nuclear weapons. And one argument the Chinese scholar Cheng Kai has made, therefore, is that this appeal was not so much meant to stop nuclear weapons, but to educate the Chinese people about this new Cold War framework, namely to tell the Chinese people that the United States is now the enemy and the Soviet Union is now the friend within this new Cold War order. And in fact, this did need to be explained, because if you think back to the Second World War, that the United States were actually the ally of China against Japan. But now it was not the ally anymore. You had to explain to the people, but it was the enemy. And having this signature campaign was a good way to get that message across. Now, in the end, allegedly 200 million signatures were collected on the Stockholm Appeal in China. Now, I recommend that we take this number with a grain of salt. There were reports that some people signed more than once. There was also a lot of room for fraud. For example, you could sign on behalf of someone who was illiterate. But it doesn't really matter how many signatures were collected. What is important really is a side effect of this campaign, which Henrietta Harrison points to, namely that knowledge about nuclear weapons became more widespread in China among the general population. And the side effect of that side effect is, of course, that people would be scared of nuclear weapons, especially of the nuclear weapons owned by the United States. And then it gets even worse. In the 1960s, China falls out with the Soviet Union in something called the Sino-Soviet split. And now China has to fear the nuclear weapons of both superpowers, of the United States and of the Soviet Union. Now, if you're the Chinese government, how do you deal with this? How do you stop your population from panicking? This is how. Mao Zedong had a dual strategy towards the atomic bomb. And one part of this dual strategy was to say, the atomic bomb is a paper tiger. And this means the atomic bomb isn't actually so terrible. So what I have here for you on the slide is a propaganda booklet from 1958 that shows you what to do if an atomic bomb is dropped in your neighborhood. So particularly like here in the bottom right corner of this picture. So essentially, what it tells you to do is to lie next to the window, face away from the glass, because the greatest danger to you, according to this propaganda booklet, is coming from the glass splinters that might scratch your face. Now, obviously, I do not recommend imitating that. Obviously, this is not going to protect you against nuclear weapons. But this was the propaganda. Now, Chinese propaganda is very often tied in with a huge, complex network of philosophy, namely what might be called Chinese Marxism. So here, Mao Zedong fought. And I have here a quotation for you from the Little Red Book. The Little Red Book is a collection of Mao Zedong quotations. That is the philosophical background to this propaganda booklet that I just showed you. So I'll read this out for you. This is this paper tiger theory, the idea that the atomic bomb is a paper tiger whilst in the hands of the United States, so meaning it's not actually dangerous. Mao Zedong says, riding roughshod everywhere, United States imperialism has made itself the enemy of the people of the world and has increasingly isolated itself. The atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs in the hands of the United States imperialists will never cow those who refuse to be enslaved. The raging tide of the people of the world against the United States aggressors is irresistible. Their struggle against United States imperialism and its lackeys will assuredly win still greater victories. Now, why does Mao Zedong say that the atomic bomb isn't actually dangerous while it is wielded by the United States? Well, there's even more philosophy behind it, and the philosophical reason that Mao Zedong gives is that even with the atomic bomb, the United States would not be able to win a war against China. And the reason is, and this is another part of his philosophy, the reason is that victory and defeat in a war is not decided by the superiority or inferiority of weapons, but it is decided by the question of whether you have the people behind you. And his idea is, of course, in China you have people behind, he has the people behind him, therefore China cannot be defeated by the United States. Now I got two quotations for you here to back this up. Mao Zedong says, the Revolutionary War is a war of the masses. Only mobilizing the masses and relying on them can wage it. And he also says, what is a true bastion of iron? It is the masses. The millions upon millions of people who genuinely and sincerely support the revolution. That is the real iron bastion, which it is impossible for any force on earth to smash. The counter-revolution cannot smash us. On the contrary, we will smash it. Rallying millions upon millions of people round the revolutionary government and expanding our revolutionary war, we shall wipe out all counter-revolution and take over the whole of China. And I got another quotation for you here that sums this up very nicely. Mao Zedong says, all reactionaries are paper tigers. In appearance, the reactionaries are terrifying, but in reality they are not so powerful. From a long-term point of view, it is not the reactionaries, but the people who are powerful. So, the atomic bomb in the hands of the United States is a paper tiger. China does not need to fear it. The Soviet head of state, Nikita Khrushchev, when he heard this, panicked. Because he says, no, listen, this atomic bomb is really quite dangerous. Don't say these things. But Mao Zedong says, no, the atomic bomb isn't the big danger to China at all. China's population is so huge that even if an atomic bomb kills a few thousands, this would not win a war against China. Now, you might say this paper tiger theory is quite surprising, but actually it's not unique to China at all. And in the next slide, I want you to watch this famous duck and cover video that was produced in the United States in the 1950s, which has a bit the same message.
Dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered. He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Okay, so that was the paper tiger theory. But I said earlier that Mao Zedong had a dual strategy towards the atomic bomb. And if one part of that strategy was the paper tiger theory, the second part of that strategy was Mao Zedong saying, we also need an atomic bomb. And here I have a quotation for you from something Mao Zedong said. So, we still don't have the atomic bomb, he says. But in the past, we didn't have airplanes or artillery either. We relied on millets and rifles to defeat the Japanese imperialists. So that refers to the Second World War, and Chiang Kai-shek. That refers to the Civil War. Chiang Kai-shek was the leader of the Nationalist Party in the Civil War. Now we're already stronger than we were in the past, and in the future we'll be even stronger than now. Not only are we going to have more airplanes and artillery, but also the atomic bomb. In today's world, if we don't want to be bullied, we have to have this thing. What should we do? Now, initially, you will remember in the context of the Sino-Soviet friendship, the Soviet Union sent a lot of advisors to China, and initially the Soviet advisors helped China with building the atomic bomb, but then you will also remember that I said that the Soviet Union and China fell out. There was the Sino-Soviet split, and in that context, unsurprisingly, the Soviet advisors left China, so China needed to finish building the atomic bomb on its own, and it achieved that by 1964. And this is the front page of People's Daily, the most important newspaper in China, on the 17th of October 1964, where it says, "A great success in strengthening the power of national defense and an important contribution to protecting world peace. The detonation of our country's first atomic bomb has been successful." In conclusion, China's desire to become an important player on the international stage goes back to its experiences in the 19th century and to what it perceives of as the humiliations at the hands of Western imperialism. And this is arguably a very important driving force in Chinese foreign politics in the Cold War era and all the way until today. And having nuclear weapons was an important step towards achieving this goal for China. And here again I want to refer to Nicola Horsberg's argument that China was now, after 1964, part of this nuclear club. And it now had a stronger voice in shaping the world order. Now obviously China tried to achieve this through a range of methods, and owning nuclear weapons was only one of them. But China's desire to shape the world order is really something that we need to be aware of in the present, and something without which, I would want to argue, we cannot really understand our world in the 21st century. Okay, so have another look at your takeaway points, see if you have achieved them. If not, rewind the video, watch it again. Now, I hope you found this lecture informative. I hope it has sparked your interest in the study of modern China, and I hope that this might be a line of inquiry that you will want to pursue further in the future. So thank you for listening, and goodbye.